All right, so we're diving into the world of pharmaceutical wholesale today. You sent over some really interesting stuff about becoming what is it, a wholesale merchant in pharmaceutical goods?
Yeah, it's a mouthful. Huh.
It is, a little bit. And frankly, I gotta say, I'm pretty curious. This RoleCatcher platform you sent over seems like the place to be for this kind of deep dive.
It really shows you how specialized these online career platforms are getting.
They are.
And wholesale merchant in pharmaceutical goods might sound a little, I don't know, jargony, but it's actually a super important role when it comes to healthcare. We're talking about how those life-saving medications actually make their way from like the factory floor all the way to your local pharmacy.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I have to admit, I never really think about that part of it. I'm just like, okay, I need my prescription filled.
Exactly.
So, are these wholesale merchants kind of like the negotiators behind the scenes, making sure that, the pharmacy shelves actually stay stocked?
Exactly. Think of them as like these connectors, right? They make sure there's a smooth and, ethical flow of pharmaceuticals
Okay.
from point A to point B.
So it's not just about like knowing the price of aspirin in bulk.
No, not at all. It's a
Ah.
lot more than that.
Okay, so the role catcher guide you sent over, it really emphasized how this role requires continuous learning.
Absolutely.
So are we talking like, subscribing to every medical journal out there?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
It's constantly changing, this industry.
Right.
New regulations, new drugs being discovered. The market's always shifting. RoleCatcher really stressed attending those conferences, reading all those industry publications. It's like a constant part of the job.
That makes sense, especially because you're dealing with people's health.
Huge responsibility.
Yeah, it's not like selling, I don't know, shoes. Like the stakes are a lot higher.
Absolutely.
And then on top of that, you got to be a pro at communication, negotiation, problem solving.
For sure.
We're talking a serious skill set here.
Oh, absolutely. And RoleCatcher really highlighted active listening as one of the most important skills, even above persuasion, which is interesting.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. It's really about, understanding the needs, the concerns of both your suppliers and the buyers.
Yeah.
You've got to build trust and these long-term relationships.
That's fascinating. It's interesting how it blends those soft skills with like a really strong analytical foundation
Yeah.
because you have to, understand the market trends and the science behind it all. And the guide also mentioned a lot about how technology is playing a bigger and bigger role,
For sure.
like using AI to analyze these huge catalogs of pharmaceutical drugs. It's pretty wild.
It's incredible, right? Like RoleCatcher gave the example of AI being used to tailor job applications and then analyze, job specs.
Wow.
So even if you're not like a tech whiz, you've got to at least be comfortable with how technology is shaping the field.
It's changing everything.
It is, absolutely.
Mhm.
For example, like imagine a wholesale merchant using AI to track inventory levels in real time
Wow.
to make sure that a hospital is getting those medications right when they need them.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Wow, that's wild. AI actually predicting what medicine a hospital needs and when they need it. It's like, that's some serious sci-fi stuff, but it's happening right now.
I know, it's pretty incredible. And it just goes to show how these wholesale merchants, they really have to be adaptable, right?
Totally.
But AI or no AI, those
Mm.
core responsibilities, those are still crucial.
Right.
And RoleCatcher actually breaks them down really well.
Right.
So they start with, in-depth research.
So are we talking like, I don't know, a pharmaceutical detective, but instead of like a dusty crime scene, they're scouring through databases.
Exactly. Yeah. You got to understand, like, the needs, the buying capacity, any compliance requirements on both sides, right?
Right.
The buyers, the suppliers.
Okay.
You got to connect the dots and make sure it's a compatible match
Hmm.
within this whole pharmaceutical web.
No, it's a web. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then comes the actual like wheeling and dealing, the negotiating of those contracts, making sure everything lines up with those regulations that always seem to be changing.
Exactly. It's a real balancing act
Right.
with some pretty high stakes.
Mhm.
I mean, imagine like negotiating a contract for a life-saving cancer drug with a huge, hospital chain.
Right.
But then at the same time, you're trying to make sure a small rural pharmacy is getting a fair deal too.
Oh, wow. So you've got these huge players and these smaller players, and they're all relying on you.
Exactly. And that's why RoleCatcher really, really drives home this point that building those relationships,
Yeah.
that's key. That's crucial. It's about trust. It's about communicating clearly and really kind of navigating that whole dance of supply and demand.
It really is a dance. Okay, so speaking of supply and demand, What about the actual logistics of it all?
Mm.
Like, it's one thing to, shake hands on a deal, but how do these guys actually make sure that those medications get where they need to be? Like, on time, in perfect condition.
Right. And that's where things get even more interesting because now we're talking about coordinating with the suppliers,
Yeah.
managing the inventory, sometimes dealing with like international shipping regulations, making sure that the temperature is controlled during transport,
Hmm.
especially with, medications that are sensitive.
Right. They can't just, like, get overheated on a tarmac somewhere.
Exactly. It's a huge operation.
Wow. So it really is like this perfectly timed symphony, but instead of instruments you're working with, like these life-saving medications.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. And remember, the guide also mentioned, like, you need constant vigilance.
Oh, I bet.
These merchants, they always have to have an eye on those market trends, what the competitors are doing, those regulations. Like we said, they're always changing.
It's like you can never rest in this job.
No, it's very dynamic. You have to be able to adapt and really understand that whole landscape of pharmaceuticals.
It sounds intense. Okay, so we've talked about what they're responsible for, the environment,
Yeah.
how fast-paced it is.
Right.
But what about the skills themselves? Like, what does it actually take to really be successful as a wholesale merchant in pharmaceutical goods?
Yeah, I mean, RoleCatcher gave a pretty extensive list, but if we had to just like boil it down to a few key areas.
Okay, so like top three must-haves if you are even thinking about, okay, maybe this career is for me.
All right, yeah, I like it. So, number one, absolutely no question about it. Got to have those communication and negotiation skills.
Of course, yeah.
You're dealing with these high-stakes transactions, you're building trust, and sometimes, things can get a little tense,
I
right?
mean,
So you got to be persuasive, but also empathetic. You got to be able to communicate well and find that common ground.
okay, so it's not just about being like a smooth talker.
No, definitely not.
You got to understand where everyone's coming from.
Exactly.
Okay, that's number one. What about number two on the must-have list?
Number two, I would say, is definitely analytical skills. I mean, think about it. You're analyzing those market trends. You got to understand financial data, and you're making big decisions based on some pretty complex information.
All right,
You need that solid analytical foundation to really make it in this field.
that makes sense. Okay, so we've got communication, we've got analysis. What's that third pillar holding up this whole career path?
Number three might surprise you a little bit. Organizational skills.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so explain that one.
Remember that whole symphony we talked about with all those moving parts?
Yeah.
That requires serious attention to detail, right? Managing complex contracts, you're tracking inventory, coordinating all those deliveries, and you're doing all of that while staying on top of deadlines and, any hiccups that might pop up along the way.
Right, because one little thing goes wrong, that whole symphony could fall apart.
Exactly, yeah. It's a fast-paced environment. Any mistake could have a domino effect.
It sounds like it. So you need that mix. You need those people skills, that analytical side, and then, like you said, a good dose of organization just to keep it all together.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's say someone's listening to this and they're like, you know what? That sounds like me. That sounds like something I'd be good at, something I'd enjoy.
Yeah.
What does that road actually look like? What does it take to actually become a wholesale merchant in pharmaceutical goods?
Well, according to RoleCatcher, it usually starts with a bachelor's degree in a related field. So we're talking, business administration, marketing, maybe even supply chain management.
Okay.
You got to have that solid business foundation.
So you've got that degree. That's like your ticket to the game. But what about actually getting in the door? It seems like a super competitive field. So are we talking like internships, entry-level positions, or maybe you gotta like apprentice under some pharmaceutical guru, learn the ancient secrets?
Well, RoleCatcher, they really stress the importance of, having that mix of practical experience along with your education. So yeah, internships, even part-time jobs, volunteering, anything in like a pharmaceutical or a wholesale setting, that can be super valuable.
Right, so you can actually see how things work in the real world.
Exactly. And it shows employers that, you can actually handle the demands of the job because, like we talked about, it's a pretty multifaceted role.
Totally. And it probably helps you figure out if you actually like enjoy that fast-paced environment, before you dive in head first.
Exactly.
So speaking of diving in, what's the day-to-day reality like? Is it all like high-powered boardrooms and making billion-dollar deals? Or is it more like, I don't know, controlled chaos?
I'd say RoleCatcher paints a picture of, yeah, a really dynamic and demanding workplace, for sure.
Yeah, I bet.
You're juggling a lot of different things at once.
So less Wolf of Wall Street, more like octopus of pharmaceuticals, like skillfully navigating all these different tasks.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Think, bustling offices, maybe with those multi-screen setups,
Yeah.
to keep track of all that market data.
Right, they've got to have like a whole command center going on.
Oh, definitely. And they're probably glued to their phones, you know, negotiating deals, troubleshooting any logistical nightmares that might pop up, and of course, always working those relationships with suppliers and buyers.
So this is definitely not the job for someone who likes to like sit in a quiet corner and like, just crunch numbers all day.
Yeah, you got to be comfortable with a little bit of chaos.
It takes a certain personality to thrive in that kind of high pressure, always on environment. But with all that said, I mean, RoleCatcher also highlighted, the rewards, like we talked about the long hours, the tough negotiations.
Right.
But those things, they often mean you're looking at some pretty impressive earning potential,
Right.
And good job security too, I would imagine.
Absolutely. There's a huge demand for people who can really excel in this field, which means if you're good at this, you can earn a great living. And you've got that stability.
Yeah. So you're not, worried about your job disappearing next week.
Exactly.
So it's kind of that classic, like, high risk, high reward kind of thing, right? You
Right.
put in the time, you hone those skills, and then, you reap the benefits.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. And plus, beyond just, the money and the stability, there's that feeling that you're really playing a vital role in the healthcare system. You're making sure that people are getting the medications they need.
That's huge. Like you said, you're not selling widgets. You're actually making a difference.
Exactly.
That's got to feel good. Okay, so what about moving up the ladder? What does that look like? Is it pretty straightforward, or are there like different paths you can take within this world of pharmaceutical wholesale?
RoleCatcher, they actually outlined a few different possibilities. Like if you're in a larger organization, you could, become a sales manager, a procurement manager, maybe even move into like a strategic business development role.
So you move away from the day-to-day deal making and you get to like, sit back and do the big picture stuff.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Or if you're more of an entrepreneurial type, you could always start your own trading business.
Oh, wow. So you take everything you've learned, the connections you've made, and just like build your own empire. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a popular path.
Yeah.
And don't forget about, the growing need for consultants in this field.
Yeah.
People who can provide like specialized guidance on how to navigate the supply chain, the regulations, the global market. It's all changing so fast.
It's a lot to keep up with. So it seems like the career path, it's not like a straight line. It's more like, I don't know, choose your own adventure.
I like that. Yeah. There are a lot of twists and turns and opportunities if you're up for the challenge.
Eh.
I love it. Well, we have covered a ton in this deep dive. I mean, we really got into it from like the day-to-day stuff to the big trends and those vital skills you got to have to make it work.
It's been a really interesting conversation.
It has. And, like with any good deep dive, we're left with even more questions than we started with.
Always.
We've talked about where things are now, but, what about the future? I mean, the technology is like changing the entire landscape of healthcare so quickly. I mean, will we see a day when AI is like taking over those negotiations? Or will it be those human skills? The persuasion, the relationship building, the ability to adapt. Will those become even more important in this like tech-driven world we're living in?
That's a great question. And definitely is something to think about, especially if you're interested in, a career where you're really on the cutting edge of healthcare. Absolutely. So if you're out there and you love a good challenge, you're a natural negotiator and you're not afraid to, roll up your sleeves and get to work, this world of pharmaceutical wholesale might be right up your alley. It's demanding, no doubt, but the rewards, both the financial ones and the personal satisfaction of, really making a difference, those can be huge. And who knows, maybe you'll be the one like pioneering those AI-powered pharmaceutical deals in the future.
The future is wide open.
It is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those thought-provoking questions.